force you to die. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, REFORGED.
Bring me his head!
With Game of Thrones not returning until the summer of 2017, we knew we were going to have to return to Westeros and hold the door. We're gonna make ice. Ice is made out of Valyrian steel, which looks a lot like Damascus in pattern. We're gonna use a pretty standard Viking multi-core construction. However, the core will not be twisted Damascus, it will be random Damascus, 15 and 20 and 1095. And the outside is very bright, so we're gonna make that from 15 and 20. We couldn't get our hands on some really big 15 and 20, so Ilya is gonna go ahead and stack these up like he would a pattern welded billet and draw those out into our edge wrap.
Okay, we're getting ready to stack up our billet for our Game of Thrones build here. We're going to take the pieces that Matt cut. I'll clamp them all together, put them in the vise, weld them so they don't separate, then I'll weld the handle on.
After getting the initial forge weld on the edge billet, Ilya is going to now draw this out into a bar. He's got to get it long enough so it can completely wrap around our core and be forge welded as one.
The sword, as you see it in the series, is composed of multiple bars. The outside edge is very bright and looks like monosteel. So to achieve the solid and bright color, I welded up a bunch of strips of 15 and 20. The core of the blade is pattern welded. It is approximately 120-160 layers of Damascus random pattern. So here's my core billet. It is composed of 22 layers of 1095 and 15 and 20 alternating. I will have to increase the layer count by folding it approximately 3 times, and then I will be ready to assemble the edge and the core together. I've drawn out the core for ice. I left it a little bit thicker on purpose, because when I drew out the core, I used my texture tool to disturb some of the pattern in the Damascus. After I give it to Matt to grind flush and clean everything, the edge bar will be welded with the core, and the disturbed pattern will show up in the final piece.
We now have our edge wrap and our Valyrian steel core forged. My next step is to go ahead and sand each side flush like I did this one. Get rid of all that texturing that Ilya did. And then I have to do the full perimeter of this core to make sure that this bar will stick nice and evenly to this central core. Now that we have our inner core and the outer wrap ground and clean, Ilya's gonna tack weld at the one shoulder, then we're gonna use the torch and heat a very specific area up just to get that perfect bend to match the tip of the inner core.
Now that we have the entire billet welded up for ice, we're going to be taking it to the power hammer and stretching it out. You have to be very careful because we've got to keep the outside wrap parallel so the edges look correct when we do the etching. Ilya now begins to bevel the edges on this sword. He's going to just take it down a certain amount. Some of it will be ground. We're going to have to leave it a little bit thick because we're going to be going to heat treating. When you leave those edges thick, you have much less chance of cracking your material.
Alright, now that we have the forging complete on our blade, it's time to start the grinding. So a few things to keep in mind. On the show, it's listed as Ned Stark's greatsword, but it has all the characteristics of an executioner's sword. And recently, I went to the Klinging Museum in Solingen, Germany, where I got to do a lot of up-close and personal studying on executioner swords. First, I'm going to put really aggressive flats on this blade, and then I'm going to do real steep bevels all the way around. After heat treat, I'm going to turn those sharp peaked bevels into a convex grind, which helps cut heads off easier. This blade also has 3 fullers starting at the shoulder, one that runs all the way down the center and 2 that run parallel about halfway. But right now I just want to do that central fuller, because if I do the 2 on the side, after heat treating when I do the rest of the grinding, they'll just disappear, but the center one won't ever get touched, so we're going to put that one in now. So far, it's been a lot of fun returning to Game of Thrones once again. I wanted to make ice ever since the very first episode of Game of Thrones, and now we finally got our chance.
Matt, guess what?
What?
Winter's coming. To make the guard, I take this piece of 1 1/4 inch by 1 1/4 inch mild steel. I cut off a piece this big, then upset it vertically on the power hammer to ensure the thickness for the longette area. Then, I flatten it out and mark an approximate middle with a hot cut. I'm not cutting it, I'm just scoring it. From then on, I taper the pieces out. After that, I use a die set, these are called spring dies, to round them out a little bit. It is somewhat complicated to create a taper using these, so there's a lot of rough areas which Matt will have to grind later, but it's doable.
After getting the guard forged, it's time to refine the shape. I moved to the sanders to get this done. I'm gonna turn those coins down a bit, refine the shape in the middle, and then I'll move on and get it slotted in the mill.
So on the ends of the quillions for ice, there's two large brass discs on the end. We're gonna make those, we're gonna bore the center of them afterwards. When we bore the center, then they're gonna slip on the ends of the quillions. That end of the quillion will be treated like it's a rivet. Matt's gonna upset the end to hold them in place. I'm gonna go ahead and cut them. I'm gonna drill that center hole, and then I'm gonna cut the two beads, and then I'll just hand cut them off later and blend them on the sanders.
As I told you guys earlier, I had a chance to go to the Cleaning Museum in Soligan, and here's a really good example of an executioner sword with the exact same guard, with the exact same ends. The guard is now fully to shape. I just gotta run it through some grits to polish it out. I'm gonna use the slack of the sander to do most of it. Since our parts are round, this keeps it nice and true. With a sword of this length and girth, you have to make sure that heat is even. It sounds a whole lot easier than it really is. You're gonna see Ilya slide the blade in and out of the forge until it's the perfect color red, and then move to the quench.
I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men. I betrayed the faith of my king and the trust of my friend Robert. I swore to protect and defend his children, but before his blood was cold, I plotted to murder his son and seize the throne for myself.
Blade came out nice and true after the quench. Gonna let it sit in the vise so it cools nice and slow and doesn't pull or warp, and then we'll have it ready for polishing. Hey Matt! What's up? You wanna come get this thing polished, dude? Dude, I'm only one man. Now that the blade has been quenched, it's time to temper it. We're gonna do this using a hot oil bath. Rick places the blade into the oil. We'll leave it there for about an hour at 450 degrees, and then remove it and be able to polish it from there. Now that we have our blade heat treated and tempered, it's time to turn that hex grind into a convex grind. The way I'm going to do that first is going horizontally on the contact wheel, then I'll move to the slack of the sander to true everything up. This really is my least favorite grind to do. I like everything to be nice and sharp and true, but in this case, it's the right grind for the job, so I'm going to get it done. One of the tricky things to remember when doing a grind like this is by the time you get to the 220 grit, it's really sharp on the edge. That convex grind is there for one reason and one reason only, to create an evil cutting sword blade. I took a piece of round tubing and crushed it just a little bit to create an ovate setting where John is now going to weld it to the guard. This will also double as a way to lock our wood handle into place. One of the final things we have to do to this guard before we glue it and then assemble it is to peen the brass beads on the ends. I'm going to use a torch and heat from the top and just strike down carefully to make sure that peen is nice and even. As I told you guys before when I was doing the central fuller, after our blade is completely refined, then we'll add in those last two fullers. So I move back to the narrow wheel and strike them in.
Matt's going to finalize the form for this pommel on the sanders, but I'm going to start by cutting the profile for him directly on the lathe in the round, and then he'll flatten the sides.
Our blade is now polished. I'm degreasing it to take off any chance of fingerprints or other oils being contaminated in the etch tank. We're going to stick the blade in some ferric chloride and bring out our Valerian steel pattern on the core. Here we go, my friends. That's just a quick dip. Here you can clearly see the difference in the pattern from the core to the outside wrap. Gonna let this sit in our ferric for about an hour, and then we'll be ready to assemble. Ever since the first season of Game of Thrones, when we got our first glimpse of ice, everyone on the BKS team wanted to make it. It's just a shame that Ned Stark won't be around to swing in the demos.
The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.